So, welcome to our presentation today. Um, John Cebula will be the presenter. He is a longtime DuPage County resident. He's taught at both COD and Northern Illinois University. Uh, he's volunteered for the Forest Preserve District. He did a study on reptiles and amphibians. He's also a butterfly monitor at the Kirk Prairie over at COD. And my understanding, he also has a lot of presentations he gives. He's a popular local speaker, a lot on birds, if I got that right. Um, but he joins us through the magic of Zoom. He's in Florida right now. So think of that as you see the flower behind him. It's sort of a reminder that he's in warmer clime. And if it wasn't for Zoom and we had to meet in person, John wouldn't be our speaker today. So, John, welcome.
Thank you.
Take it away.
There we go. Well, thank you. I'm very happy and actually a little flattered to be asked to present to this group. I've heard about it for a long time. Uh, I suspect that before the evening is through, I'm going to learn a lot about plants in DuPage County that I don't know about. But I became interested in milkweeds after reading Doug Tellmay's book about oak trees. And I've looked around at plants in my own garden and plants on the Kurt Prairie and realized that a species of plants really supports a lot more excuse me, supports a kind of a ecosystem in and of itself. Now, milkweeds, of course, are labeled a weed, but I think most of you recognize that they're very beautiful plants. I know I was surprised the first time I realized how fragrant they were, and they play a very important place in nature. Milkweeds are members of the dogbane family, which, as the name suggests, kind of toxic. There's over 2,000 species, and they include things not only milkweeds, but ornamentals like periwinkles and jasmine. I always find it fascinating with these toxic plants that at some point, either indigenous cultures or our own European backgrounds, if that's our background, use them in folklore, in remedies and chewing gum and so on. The most common dogbane I find throughout DuPage County is the hemp dogbane, which itself is a host to a variety of insects, including clearwing moths, which look like hummingbirds. There's a tiger moth, and one of my favorite beetles is the small little dogbane leaf beetle. If you look at the photograph in the upper right-hand corner, even this beetle is barely a quarter inch, maybe a little slightly larger. You can see my reflection on its shell there. As far as milkweeds are concerned, there's many species, approximately 200. They're a Western Hemisphere species, although they've been introduced pretty much around the world. And they get their name because their sap, which has a small amount of latex in it, also contains various cardiac glycosides, the toxins we'll refer to. And I'll probably just say toxins because I can never remember cardiac glycosides all at once. The one we're most familiar with, I think, is the common milkweed, the one I show in the picture. And this species alone is host to more than 450 insect species. Here in Illinois, we do have quite a number, over 24. DuPage County has 9 species. Kane County has 12. If you're down in Will County, 12 species have been found there. One I found at the Kurt Prairie is called fittingly enough, the prairie milkweed looks very similar. The flower shape, the flower colors are a little bit different. So is the leaf shape and size. And a couple other species, or three more species I've found on the prairie, include the butterfly milkweed, the whortle milkweed, and my personal favorite, the swamp milkweed. Sometimes people ask me about birds and insects, and I assume milkweeds. Why are there so many kinds? Well, they're all adapted to very specific environments, and so they have their preferred soil moisture level, exposure to the sun, and so on. That being said, many can coexist in a garden. At the Kirk Prairie, they're found within a few feet of each other. So they can be fairly adaptable. This is one that we find here in Florida, and I was introduced to it. I gave a presentation on Florida butterflies, and a gentleman told me that he had a milkweed tree, which I had never heard about. Well, went online, did a little investigation, and found out that there is, in fact, a member of that dogbane family that's different genus from milkweeds, but closely related. They give it various names. Crowned flower is a common name. And I found one in a garden that was quite large, at least 5, maybe even 6 feet tall, very thick stems. Over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, I found it hosting a number of monarch caterpillars. I think the most I ever counted on it was 17. This is a picture of it maybe halfway through my observation period. I put an arrow. If you look carefully to where the arrow is pointing, you can see a monarch caterpillar. A week or two later, it was almost entirely stripped of leaves. This last few weeks, I've been visiting it, and it's fully leafed out. I haven't seen any caterpillars on it, but it's beginning to go into bloom. In fact, the photograph behind my head is of one of the flowers on this plant. And like I said, it gets quite large. Like most perennials, milkweeds have basically 3 stages. Takes about 3 years to mature. After they go to seed, the seeds need to spend a nice cold winter. They germinate in the spring, develop roots and a little bit of foliage. The second year, the foliage fully develops, and the third year, there's flowers. Depending on the species, they may spread by rhizomes. For example, the common milkweed is known for this, and they form very large clumps that can be considered a single plant. The pollination takes place in a very unusual manner. The flowers have a very intricate structure. There's 5 petals. They surround 5 membrane parts called corona, and the corona are composed of 5 parts that hold bags of pollen. When an insect visits the flower, its feet may slip into these pollen sacs, which then attach to the insect's feet. And when it flies off, the sacs detach. But many insects, quite frankly, aren't large enough, so they might lose a leg, or they, in fact, become trapped and die. When the insect visits another flower, the process is reversed. The pollination is accomplished. The most effective pollinators of milkweed are our native bumblebees. I've read conflicting things about honeybees. Many accounts say that they're not good, that they often get caught and die. Other accounts say they're successful, and I haven't observed anything one way or other to confirm or deny this account. But bumblebees generally are much better pollinators than honeybees. They're about 90% effective no matter what they visit. Honeybees are about 5% effective. And here's a sort of a close-up of a flower, the petals, the corona structure, and then the pollen, little pollen bags in the middle.
The previous picture.
Now, there's a lot of pollinators for the milkweeds. These are all photographs of various insects taken on milkweeds. The black swallowtail, for example, on a butterfly milkweed.
Like photos.
And the brown belted bumblebee, probably on a swamp milkweed, I'm not sure. And then a digger wasp. Let's go. And of course, these are photographs from the various stages of the life cycle. The flower, early in the spring, there's the green pod, and then by September, October, they've gone to seed, and the seeds start dispersing. Speaking of seed dispersal, I think there's a lot to be learned. There's about 200 seeds per pod, regardless of the species. Those silky tufts catch the wind and carry the seed. And the heavier seeds really don't travel too far, but they have a better germination rate. And this has been tested. I wanted to find out how far seeds travel. And the only information I've been able to glean so far is that pretty much every source has some way of saying seeds travel great distances, but how far that distance is, I don't know. The relationship between vertebrates and milkweeds hasn't received a lot of study. We know that in the West, several species of hummingbirds will visit some of the Western milkweed species. We know that small perching birds, such as flycatchers, use the seed floss to line their nest, and chickadees and orioles, such as this Baltimore oriole, are known to use the stem fibers to build nests. Well, most of the ecosystem on a milkweed consists of insects, and plants and insects have a very, very complicated relationship. Plants convert the earth's minerals to food with the sun's energy, but they don't want to be eaten, and they develop all kinds of ways to dissuade herbivores from eating them. Milkweeds have their leaf hairs, the poison in their sap, the latex, the stickiness of the sap are all defenses, and that probably the stems. The stems are quite fibrous and tough. Out west in fields or in pastures where there's a lot of cattle, milkweeds are considered unwelcome guests because cows eat them and are poisoned by the latex, but it would take a lot of chewing. As I'm going to talk about a little bit later, at one point, milkweeds were considered going to be tested as a source of rope. At the same time, plants rely on insects for pollination, many plants, and develop ways to attract them, flowers with nectar and sacrificing their pollen. And this is kind of a give and take war. It's fascinating. I took a class this summer from University of Edmonton in integrated pest management, and pointed out that reason so many insects seem to be pests is our food crops are grown, so all the natural defenses of the plants have been taken away. So this is a Gulf fritillary here in Florida on it's not a milkweed, but it's a species of butterflies related to monarchs. Like I said earlier, over 450 species of insects have been shown to depend on milkweeds in one way or another. And here are some of the most common ones that you'll be able to find on your milkweeds or in places in DuPage County. Curd Prairie, where I've taken a lot of the photographs, Belmont Prairie and Downers Grove, of course, the prairie at Morton Arboretum, and so on. We'll start with a pest, the oleander aphid. It's a non-native insect. It was brought in from the Mediterranean, but it's now found worldwide. Like most aphids, it's parthenogenic. That means it's entirely, in nature, it's an entirely female population. Although I read that males have been produced in the laboratory. They're vectors for various diseases affecting not only milkweeds, but many of our food crops, beans and cucumbers. I've listed a few here. I've never seen them do any serious damage to the milkweeds in my garden, but I have an ally, and it's the lady beetles. And lady beetles are milkweed or aphid specialists. They'll eat other insects, but they really, really like aphids. At the bottom of the picture, of course, there's an adult lady beetle, and at the top there's a larva. Many insects that go through a complete metamorphosis, an egg, a larva, a cocoon, an adult. The larva and the adult are almost function as different animals, but not in the case of lady beetles. They're at every stage, they're predators on aphids and similar insects. This particular lady beetle in this photograph is the most common one in DuPage County and throughout most of the United States. It's an introduced lady beetle. Sometimes it's called the Japanese lady beetle. Sometimes it's called the Asian lady beetle. If you look at the thorax, that's the section between the head and the big part, the abdomen, you'll see that it has, depending on your point of view, it's either a black W or a black M. And they're, for a lady beetle, they're kind of messy. They're the ones who want to come into your house in the winter. They're the ones that emit a really foul-smelling yellowish fluid if you handle them. They're inclined to bite if you pick them up and they get a chance. But as I've discovered, and as the literature reports, several species of lady beetle can be found on a single milkweed plant. And here are some of the ones I have found over the last year or two. The 7-spotted lady beetle, it's native. In the upper right is that the Asian lady beetle, and I think if you look carefully, you can see the W I referred to. The 14-spotted lady beetle, glacial lady beetle, and there's several more. Chances are good, though, if you go out looking for lady beetles, the first ones you're going to find are going to be those Asian lady beetles. One of my favorite insects on the milkweed is called the large milkweed bug, and it's a true bug. Its name, Hemiptera, refers to the fact that half of the wing is hard and half of the wing is soft. It has a very wide natural distribution throughout most of eastern northern hemisphere. Its life cycle kind of depends on the area. So our population, when it starts getting colder, and I kept track of it, and that was about the middle of October, they kind of disappeared from my milkweeds. They migrate to warmer areas, and they don't want to migrate too far. They enter diapause, which is a slowing down. It's not a true hibernation. And then they start moving north as the milkweeds begin to flower. They feed in the wild on milkweed seeds. They insert a beak, then inject saliva, which dissolves the seed's contents and suck the juice. They're not considered harmful to the milkweeds. And as we go through about them, I'll point some things out. They're about 3/4 of an inch long, and they're probably the most common milkweed bug in our area. Here you have several stages of their life cycle. You have a mating adult pair, and you can see it's probably about July when the milkweed flowers have formed cones. I didn't mention this, but I think it's kind of interesting. For all the blossoms on a milkweed, you see on a milkweed, only a few of them will eventually produce pods. And then you see the young, they're called nymphs. They start out very small. I think you can barely see one in the right-hand upper right-hand picture. It's off by itself on the leaf. They grow and they molt, and they have about 5 or 6 molts before they assume the adult form. And here they are, end of September, beginning of October. I experimented. I took some seeds from a milkweed pod, and that had been heavily infested with these milkweed bugs, and I got seeds to germinate. So they don't totally destroy the seeds in the pod. Also, scientists who work with these insects keep the adults alive by giving them sunflower seeds, especially fresh ones. Okay, let's see what we got going on here. Come on, let's go. Well, there's a large milkweed bug and there's a small milkweed bug. It looks very similar, although to me, the back has a little heart on it, whereas the large milkweed bug's about 3/4 of an inch long. These little guys are about 1/2 an inch long. I don't find them forming the large numbers that you use the word infestation, despite its connotation, on milkweeds. They have at least one generation a year, and they have a little more varied diet. They'll drink the nectar and also the sap from milkweed seeds, but they're also predators on flies, bees, and beetles. It's only after the milkweed seeds fully mature that the milkweed seeds become a food source for these little bugs. And there's 2 other insects that are considered mimics of the small milkweed bug. One's the false milkweed bug, and the other, what was it? Was a box elder bug, some box elder bugs. This one, it's interesting. It's does look a lot like a small milkweed bug, although the X is more pronounced and the heart's not quite so pronounced. There's a few miscellaneous things. They all belong to the same family, but the large milkweed bug is in one genus. The small and the false are in the same genus, which basically means the small bugs and the large bugs are both about as closely related as a robin is to a bluebird. And I've mentioned the fibers in the stem of stalk of milkweeds. I think you can see it here on this example. There we go. I spotted this one on one of my milkweeds this summer, and using some contacts and some photographs and other things, we identified it as an obscure plant bug. And what did I find out about the obscure plant bug going online? I found out it's called the obscure plant bug. I mean, there's virtually no information on it. To me, it looks like in this photograph, it might be trying to get nectar ahead of time, or it just might have landed there accidentally. I don't know if we think of plants as being patriotic, but our milkweeds kind of went to war during World War II. Prior to World War II, the Navy used life jackets using the floss from the kapok tree, which grows in the South Pacific Islands. Well, Japan took control of those islands, and so the floss was lost. After some experimenting, the Navy started using milkweed floss. It was waterproof, very buoyant. It took about 40 pounds of floss in one life jacket, and children, as part of their patriotic volunteering during World War II, would go out and gather milkweed so that there could be floss. They also started using the floss mixed with feathers as insulation. By itself, it wasn't very good. Finally, the United States started experimenting using milkweed sap as a substitute for rubber, trying to get the latex out of it. They experimented for several years and finally abandoned the project. The red-banded leafhopper is related to cicadas. It's a small insect that feeds on a variety of plants, including the milkweeds. Again, they can reach pest-like proportions, but not in a natural area. There's too many natural predators and other things that control them. Well, we're going on to some of the what are called the higher insects, things like bees and butterflies and beetles. And we'll start with the swamp milkweed leaf beetle. There's over 1,400 leaf beetles in in North America, and the adults feed on flowers and leaves and so on. The females and the larvae will eat the eggs, including those of their own species, but the males won't. And when they're ready, they'll drop to the ground and overleaf in the leaf winter in the leaf litter. And I know many of you do what I do, and you kind of leave your leaves. So that's a good thing for leaf beetles and many other kinds of insects. One of my favorite beetles, and it's common on milkweeds, especially the common milkweed, is the red milkweed beetle. It's a longhorn beetle, and if you look at the photograph, I think you can see why. It has that very long antenna. The adults do something kind of surprising. They'll go and they'll open up the veins of the milkweed leaf so that the sap bleeds out, the latex. And that does two things. First of all, it makes the leaf a little more palatable. It doesn't have that toxic sap in it. And secondly, it makes the leaf easier to chew. If you were to pick one of these beetles up, it would click in your hands, and even in undisturbed beetles will purr to each other. The females lay clutches of eggs at the base of the milkweed, and the larvae the adults die off in the fall after the freeze. The adults, larvae are in the ground and they overwinter and they come out in the spring. And here are several phases, several pictures of the adults. I'm not a dirty old man, but quite often when I find these beetles, I always seem to find mating pairs, or in the upper right-hand corner, you had a couple males trying to compete for the female. They're about half an inch long. And if you go looking for them in the Kurt Prairie, sooner or later, you're going to find them right along the path. Here's an insect that's not totally dependent on milkweed, but as you can see from the large photograph, it does visit milkweeds to eat their pollen, and in the process may distribute the pollen. It's the goldenrod soldier beetle. It's most abundant on yellow flowers, but it visits a variety of flowers. It's kind of a little, maybe 3/4 of an inch long, and in the fall they become very abundant. One thing that's sometimes overlooked about pollinator plants is that they're a good they attract a variety of insects that are parasites or prey on other insects. They're natural pest controls, things like various wasps and flies. And I find a lot of them. One of the interesting things that I learned about many farms in Europe now, because they don't want to use fertilizers and pesticides and so on, is that the farmers are planting strips of native plants in their fields and around their fields to attract native insects. And so they have natural pest control. Well, here we come to the most famous milkweed resident, the monarch butterfly. And I know a lot of you are very enthusiastic about monarchs. They certainly are a large and recognizable insect, kind of the poster child for the whole insect conservation movement. They belong to a very large family that originally was found throughout the United States, but had been introduced in Europe, Australia, and other places. The monarch name comes because it from one of the British kings who belonged to the House of Orange in the Netherlands, and so they were orange and black, and thus the name. And as I think most of you are familiar with, the North American population, most of the North American population is more or less migratory. Here we have a female laying an egg on a common milkweed. I have to admit that until I saw the larva on that crown flower down here in Florida, the only monarch caterpillars and eggs I ever found were on common milkweed. And I found out there's probably a reason for that. Typically, a female will just lay one egg on a single plant, but multiple females may visit the same plant. And so it is possible to find 2 or more eggs on a leaf or on a plant. Now, the toxin in the leaf accumulates in the larva, and it's retained by the adults. And here you see them eating, and finally the chrysalis. So when the adult emerges from the cocoon or pupa, it contains those toxins. Then the monarch visits flowers, milkweed, but a lot of others. It's not really effective as a pollinator, even of milkweeds, but it does help spread the pollen. It relies very much on the color of the flower to locate the ones it prefers. And what I also found out is that milkweeds vary in their toxicity. So the butterfly milkweed, which is very common in stores, if you go to a big box store in the spring, you're going to find it offered for sale. The butterflies will visit it for the pollen and nectar, but they very seldom use it as a host plant, and it's because the latex is a little stickier, a little more ensnaring, and the toxins are a little stronger for the larva. And this is something I'm going to mention now. I might come up later, but it's worth mentioning. A large number of monarch caterpillars, when they hatch and they start feeding on milkweed, get trapped in the latex and die. It's just too much for them. So that's one of the first barriers they have to overcome. The toxins aren't a completely effective barrier, and we know there's plenty of birds that feed on them, including things like the brown thrasher here and robins, grackles, cardinals. In the West, the black-headed grosbeak, a relative of our own rose-breasted grosbeak, seems to specialize for a while on monarch caterpillars until the poison level in both the caterpillar and the caterpillars reaches a certain level, and then they stop. The adults that migrate primarily to Mexico or Southern California gradually lose the toxins in their body, and birds and mice begin preying on the adult butterflies in the late winter, early spring. Besides that, there's a variety of wasps that eat both the eggs and larvae. We have some pest predators, photograph of a crab spider on a swamp milkweed, and toxins aren't any use against one of these. And then there's a number of other insects that will lay their eggs in a caterpillar. You have a picture of a couple, and I'm not sure if these are wasps or flies, but they ate the caterpillar, and it looks to me like they're in their pupa stage. They eat the caterpillar alive. A variety of insects do that. Caterpillars of butterflies and moths are suspect to this kind of parasitic infection. The milkweed tussock moth lays clusters of eggs on milkweed. So when you find one tussock moth caterpillar, you usually find several. And those hairs on the caterpillar are irritating. If you were to pick one up, your fingertips would start burning, and eventually, it would develop itchy feeling. You just wouldn't like it at all. The adults are pretty much about the body about the size of the caterpillar, pretty much a nondescript gray. What's interesting is some of the sources that I consulted say that the adults are able to click in flight that signal to bats that they're unpalatable, which is interesting because right now scientists who study it say that butterflies evolved from moths because bat predation made it difficult for moths to survive the night. So, kind of a fascinating thing about the insects that live on milkweed is some common factor. And if you look at these three photographs, you might immediately recognize what's going on here. Orange and black, red and black, these are warning colors, right? They're signals to predators. I don't taste good, I'm bad for you, don't eat me, whatever. In fact, for a long time, the resemblance between monarch butterflies and one of their relatives, the viceroy butterfly, was considered an example of mimicry. And at first, it was thought it was an example of what's called Batesian mimicry, where a non-venomous, non-toxic species resemble ones that's toxic or venomous. With my work with reptiles, I'm familiar with coral snakes, which are red, black, and yellow. And here in Florida, there's a snake called the scarlet king snake, which is red, black, and yellow. The difference is in the coral snake, the red and yellow, in this part of the world, the red and yellow touch. In the harmless king snake, the red and black touch. But then scientists looked a little more deeply into this thing about mimicry, and they discovered that, in fact, there's something that they call Mullerian mimicry, where two species or more species have the same quality. They're unpalatable, they're venomous, and so they resemble each other. And they found out that the viceroy butterfly, like the monarch, is unpalatable to a lot of predators. In fact, here in Florida, two butterflies very closely related to the monarch, they're in the same genus, the soldier and the queen, which are extremely difficult to tell apart. Mimic not only each other, but in flight look a lot like monarch butterflies, although a little darker. A whole group of butterflies in the same family, the fritillaries, look like monarchs in flight and are also unpalatable. They feed on passion flowers, which are toxic. So here in Florida, there's a subspecies of monarch butterfly called the southern monarch or Florida monarch, depending on the book you're looking at. And it's non-migratory. In fact, usually when I go out, no matter what month of the year it is, I'll see one or more of them flying around. And I discovered that a lot of people in Florida, like people in DuPage County, are interested in monarchs. And so they go to their local big box store and they buy milkweed plants. And the milkweed plant they're buying goes by several names: tropical milkweed or scarlet milkweed. It's very, very popular. It's also very easy to escape cultivation. In fact, most of the areas I have visited in Collier County, which is just south of the Fort Myer area in Cape Coral, Bonita Springs, Naples, Marco Island are all in Collier County. Almost the only milkweeds I see in wild areas are these tropical milkweeds. The caterpillars love to eat their leaves, and the adults love to visit them for nectar. But the Xerces Society, which is the largest invertebrate conservation organization in the United States and probably the world, urges people not to use these tropical milkweeds for several reasons. One is that they're vectors for a protozoan parasite that doesn't harm the caterpillar, but when the adults emerge from their pupa, their cocoons, they often have holes in their wings and can't fly. If they do make it, they slowly spread the parasite to other flowers, other milkweeds, and the Xerces Society just urges people not to use it. In fact, I think in California, maybe one or two other states, their state laws forbidding the sale of tropical milkweed. What I found out, it kind of amazes me, a lot of people who are interested in monarchs down here in Florida grow this milkweed. They claim they have no knowledge and have never heard of the problems associated with it. And at the same time, several people I've spoke to are big defenders of tropical milkweed. Probably the biggest irony is almost every place that has a butterfly garden has tropical milkweed in its garden. If you go inside, they'll have pamphlets and leaflets about butterfly gardens and helping butterflies. And those pamphlets and leaflets urge you not to grow tropical milkweed. So yeah, it is confusing. The North American Butterfly Association prefers that people who want to help monarchs use their native milkweeds, but it doesn't discourage the use of this species. Well, here's an area where I think many of you probably know a whole lot more than I do and could give me some advice. You can get milkweed, buy it from commercial growers. The best species for our area include the common milkweed, swamp milkweed, butterfly milkweed, and so on. The seeds are easy to germinate, and this picture shows you sort of what I do. I take plastic jugs, cut them. This was my very first year. I now cut them much higher up on the jug, put in my medium, and well, we'll start at the beginning. I start in the fall. I gather seeds from my garden, and they're pretty easy to collect. I kind of let them dry for a week or so. I've never stored any for very long times, but the advice is that if you're going to store them, use paper bags or envelopes, not plastic, because the little bit of moisture in the seed will escape and the seeds will eventually mold. And generally what I do is when I separate the fluff from the seeds, I then stratify them in the fall by putting them in these planters made out of, well, I said milk jugs. They're actually, my wife has a breathing machine, so I use the bottles where water comes in. The better, I get more success if I bury them deeper rather than on the surface. And I have found that there's a lot of online instructions, much better and more detailed than I can give you. The Xerces Society, if you go to their website, eventually they have a manual about propagating milkweed. And what's interesting about it is that it's about commercial propagation. In fact, many of the insects I've shown you, they talk about as being pests. But I suppose milkweeds are no different than any other plant grown as a crop. If you're engaging in monoculture, you're sort of inviting insects to what they would see as a banquet. So you can see the various stages the seedlings emerge. Yes, in the lower left-hand corner, that's columbine. It's not milkweed, but I didn't have a I needed 3 pictures, and that's what I had, but works well with Columbine too, believe me. And then various stages. This is the first year in the upper right-hand corner. Lower right is the second year, and the third year they've bloomed. So, the question is, why not buy seeds or plants at Garden Center? And I'm going to get a little off from milkweed, but this might be something the members of the Wild Ones be interested in. We all like pollinator gardens, but this past summer, a study was published, and I believe it was by scientists at Michigan State University, when they surveyed plants sold as bedding plants, and they found the most popular annuals sold as bedding plants were begonias, impatiens, pansies, petunias, New Guinea impatiens, and geraniums. And they wanted to test them, compare them to a marigold and a zinnia. They found that the different cultivars of the 6 annuals differed in their ability to attract pollinators, but they concluded that in general, the most popular annual flowers are not good choices for attracting pollinators. In fact, in the community my wife and I live in here in Florida, when we're down, every January they send the landscapers around, and they use New Guinea impatiens everywhere. The larger plants are mostly non-native and are wind pollinated, aren't pollinated by insects. So we see very few pollinators in the community. And then the Xerces Society did a study, and they tested plants, milkweeds they found in retail nurseries, and they found that high levels of pesticides. And this quote, as I say in the quote, they found on average 12 pesticides per plant and as many as 28. So it sort of defeats the purpose. And their takeaways here, if you go to their website, is that basically you're aware of this, and you do what you can to avoid using milkweeds bought from retail stores. They did suggest at the very least that the first year you cover the plant to prevent insects from using it. And I thought this quote might be an appropriate way to end, that every single plant, every single bush is really kind of a ecosystem in and of itself, and well worth exploring. So with that being said, I want to thank you for letting me present to you. And if you have questions, I'll see if I can get this computer not to be so funky. I'm glad you were able to see something. I have something in the middle of my screen here that won't disappear. I don't know quite what I have to do. There, that's better.
John, how do you want to take the questions? You want people just to unmute and ask, or
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Let me have a swig of water here. I see my friend Kathy Lichinsky's there. Hi, Kathy. Kathy and I go way back to when the Illinois Audubon Society had a chapter in DuPage County.
Hi, John.
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing great. Always good.
Going down to Costa Rica this summer?
No, but I just got back from New Zealand, still leading the trips for the College of DuPage.
Yeah. Good. Okay, I'm ready for questions or corrections, one or other.
Bonnie, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, sure. I wanted to know what plants again were not favored by pollinators. The annuals. I didn't quite get the names of all
Okay.
those.
Yeah, it would be begonias. impatiens, geraniums, New Guinea impatiens, New Guinea impatiens, pansies. What happens if I click on this? Am I going to undo what I did? Begonia impatiens, pansies, petunias, New Guinea impatiens, geraniums.
Oh,
And
okay.
they account, the scientists say they account for 47% of the annuals sold in the United States and Europe.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And
I'll avoid buying those.
well, you know, I will tell you, I kind of like New Guinea impatiens. I don't plant them extensively, but we have a couple planters, and they're about the only flowering plant that seems to last the whole summer. So, but I plant a lot of other things. Besides milkweeds, I have a lot of red Remonarda bee balm, and that's like a hummingbird magnet. And I have a lot of coneflower and that sort of thing. And every year I have more and more milkweed, and I'm going to try with dogwood this year. I'm going to try getting some cuttings and germinating them, see what I can do.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
John, I had a question.
Sure.
You had a slide that kind of startled me, saying that monarchs are now found, originally just North America, but are now found in Europe, Australia, Hawaii, and somewhere else. And I'm just wondering, how did they get there, and how did they survive? If there's
Well, because the milkweeds have been put there. Um,
would they be considered
most-
invasives in those countries?
I haven't found anything to suggest they're treated as invasive. Um, I know monarchs occasionally naturally find themselves in Europe. They get picked up by the wind currents, and end up in England. So they weren't entirely unknown in England. They were pretty much introduced, but it's like, I'm trying to think which. I have a presentation called "Insects in our Gardens," and one of the things that I find interesting for people to think about is that most of the insects we consider pests are non-native, some huge percentage, and they were introduced, by just ordinary, commercial trade. I used to, when I was dealing with reptiles, Willowbrook would call me. Someone had bought a plant at Home Depot, and they got it home, and there was a lizard in the plant. And if a lizard can make it from Florida, where the plant was grown, to Carroll Stream, it could certainly make it. An insect could do that. Right now, what are they calling them? The spotted lanternfly is just really expanding its range. And the thinking is it was introduced. Egg cases were on some wood used for shipping pallets. Same with those giant wasp up in the Northwest. So, that's the way most pests get introduced. The other insects that are pests, the native ones, are usually considered pests on food products. And you think about it, most of our food products are developed from the wild, and our ancestors over the centuries made them more and more palatable for people. As it became more and more palatable for people, they became more and more palatable for insects, and we grow them in monoculture. So, some of the native insects have adapted to various and sundry things. And like I did mention, and I think it's kind of worthwhile mentioning again, that Xerxes Society has this booklet, or it's PDF. You can download it easily, and talks about commercial growing of milkweed. And all the insects I've mentioned are included in there as pests, although they take a kindly look towards monarch butterflies, but some of the other ones not so kindly. So, yeah. What I find too, because I know so many of you are interested in monarch butterfly conservation, there seems to be a mindset in Florida among people who are interested in monarchs that, well, our monarchs are doing fine. We're not going to have to worry. So I don't know. It will change when it will change. But
Do these monarchs that live in Australia, for example, do they migrate anywhere like
no,
ours do?
no. The populations that migrate are, first of all, in the eastern United States. So, obviously our population. And then along the West Coast. Now, the ones in the West Coast migrate down, actually kind of to the area where all the fires were, Southern California in the mountains. Can't think of his name now. I should know it. It's interesting as the areas where the pine trees, the small areas in California where they would accumulate, developers have come in and they've kind of shifted, and it's every year monarch conservationists try to find out where they are now. There is apparently, why can't I think of his name? But there is a golf course that's kind of famous, and it does have a grove of pine trees that has pretty much been consistent in attracting monarchs. And scientists who monitor the population like to go there because the site hasn't changed too much. And the people who run the golf course go to great lengths to try to keep the area suitable for monarchs. But the other populations are non-migratory. And in Australia, I imagine is pretty much would be like Florida. There's really no cold snap that would kill the adults or larvae. As I said, even today I was out at a site, and there were a couple monarchs flying by. So, again, they're year round down here. Some other questions. I like these questions. Well, I appreciate being asked to present to your organization. I can't remember. I know I have a leaflet, and I don't know if I have it on the computer down here in Florida. But I can send it to you as a PDF, and you can make it available to your members. It sort of hits the main points of what I talked about here tonight.
Sure. Yeah, send it to me, and would you be okay if we posted it on our website?
Yeah, it's a PDF. If I don't have it on, I have like 5 or 6 memory sticks down here.
I'll see what you can find, and if you find it,
I will find it sooner or later if it's down here. If not, you'll get it in April when we're back north. So, well, thank you again. If there are no more questions, Joy, you have some great conferences coming up in the next few.
John, there are some questions in the chat. You might just want to read those over, kind of.
Yeah, something's funky going on. Oh, I see them up here at 19 in chat. Whoa.
Well, I think there's only one. I mean, many of those are just comments.
Yeah, one asked about the type of Monarda, but it's just the red Monarda. I mean,
Yeah, I
that's just the more
it's
common
the one that's, and I've had it for well over a decade. It's called Inbridge Scarlet, and it turns out it's not native to our area, although the bees and the butterfly uh, the hummingbirds and the bees and the butterflies like it, and found out it's kind of native to the mountains in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Carolinas. If a milkweed is cut off at the soil at the end of the year two, will it grow back and flower in year three? Um, I'm guessing, yeah. And I don't know if it will flower, it will grow back. I took a slide out of a milkweed that's been growing uh, from underneath my tool shed in the backyard. And unfortunately, if I open the door of the tool shed, I knock it over. But it's been growing there for as long as the tool shed's been there, and that's got to be a dozen years, give or take. Yeah.
When I clean up my yard, I cut all the milkweed down to the ground. It dies back anyway and grows from
Yeah.
the root. So
I just do it in the fall.
yeah, I do in the spring, but it always comes up from and reflowers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Zinnias, salvia is good. Yeah. Some of this NK is talking about what are good pollinators. Um, I'm trying because of my connection with the Kirk Prairie. I'm trying to introduce more and more of the prairie plants in my garden. Um, Joe Pye weed, for example, and I tried wild indigo last spring and it didn't take, so I'm going to try again this year. Yeah, Kathy, you went to Central Mexico. Yeah, I can't. A woman, there's a woman, and I'd have to look in someplace online uh, who's interested in monarchs, and she bicycled from
oh,
where they are in Mexico and kind of bicycled with them all the way up to New England, uh, which I thought was kind of amazing. Okay. Okay. Bicycle, yeah, okay, bicycling with butterflies. You're right, that's the title. Yeah, yeah. I got tired reading it. My eggs started aching, but it was a good book.
it's a very good book.
Yeah. So,
One person had a comment that she bought when she was in Virginia. She bought what was she thought was a milkweed, but it turned out it was dogbane, and that it's taken over her yard, and wondered, are
wow.
is that invasive? I think that native plants can be aggressive. It doesn't mean they're invasive.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
plants seem to fight for space, and you find native plants in with other plants all the time.
That is one of the arguments against planting milkweed, that it can become milkweeds can become invasive because of spreading with their rhizomes. But I guess I'll put it this way. I don't know. My house is almost 100 years old, and I know that it's on the site of what was a Salvation Army farm. In fact, the first few years when I was gardening, I've actually found horseshoes. Um, but I should be so lucky that something becomes invasive like that. The only thing that's become evasive, and I've spent 2 years trying to get rid of it, is Siberian iris. Um, it was a good idea at the time, and I'm just really, really, really sorry that I planted it. it's physically demanding to dig it up. I've actually bought special shovels with serrated edges to cut the roots, and I've even been driven in a couple places to use some Roundup on it, which I wasn't happy to do, but nothing seemed to discourage the Siberian iris. So, but so, well, I'm sorry we had some trouble with the computers. I don't quite understand what was going on, but I'm glad you were able to see it and I was able to share.
Well, thank you, John. We appreciate it. I'm sure you're enjoying the warm weather down there.
Some days you feel like you need gills down here. So just keep that in mind. Today got up to 70 and it was cloudy all day, and I reveled in it. Especially all the people telling me how cold they were, and I'm looking at what's happening up in DuPage County, and it's like, no. And the people who complain most about it when it's in the 70s, 60s down here are the people from the north. The native Florida people love it. That finally it's not in the 80s and 90s. So keep that in mind. And so just one other thing, I have a Facebook page, John's Nature for All, and I just share various and sundry things. Sometimes I share things from Saving Monarchs and DuPage Monarch Project, my own stuff. Whenever I do a field trip, I share the photographs, and you can be inundated with pictures of Florida birds. But I invite you to go visit it.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks again, and thank
Okay.
you everybody for attending. Please sure to go to our website, dupage.wildones.org, and check out upcoming programs.